Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to dream, to dream. Everybody's got a right to love, to love. Everybody's got a right to learn, to learn. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to dream, to dream. Everybody's got a right to love, to love. Everybody's got a right to learn, to learn. Everybody's got a right to live, to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live.
Hello, everybody. We are glad to have you on this moral march to the Moral Poor People's Assembly, Low Wage Workers Assembly, the Moral March on Washington, D.C., and the polls June 18th, 2022. Can somebody wave their hands a little bit? We are glad to have all of you who are joining us. And before we do anything, we need you to share this. Find at least 12 people right now. Start sharing it out and let them know that we're live. This is a Moral Monday. We must do more, mobilize, organize, register, and educate people to vote. We are headed to Washington, D.C. for a declaration, not a day. Somebody's been hurting our brothers, and it's gone on far too long. We won't be silent anymore. The 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country are rising up with all of their allies to take on the 5 interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, / denial of health care, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And before we go any further, let's take a moment, 2 moments of silence. One, for the nearly 1 million people who have needlessly died from COVID in this country alone. If we were just better at caring for all of our people and making sure people had health care and loving one another, let's take a moment. We can't keep passing over that. Nearly 1 million people. And while we're in this place of silence, let's just remember all the needless death in Ukraine. Because if there's ever been something that's about a war economy, there's nothing just about that. It's ego and oil pipelines. Ego and oil pipelines and geopolitics. It just came across the news that they're firing some thermal bombs that when they hit buildings, they suck the air out of people and buildings. It's one of the most horrible ways to die. To think that humankind is so inhumane today. These are serious times, my brothers and sisters. There are times that we can't get unnerved. There are times that we have to stay focused. Times we have to learn how to cry and think and march and pray and protest and even be willing to put our bodies on the line in nonviolent civil disobedience, all at the same time. You know, the people in Ukraine were given 2 choices that most of the time we're given even in other areas. They were told either run or pick up a gun and fight. But there was a third choice that we wrote about in the campaign that you have to take up, not just in Ukraine, but right here. What about standing nonviolently together? What if 2 million of the people in Ukraine had surrounded their city, linked arms, young and old, women and children, while the whole world was watching? And just like that one young man stood in front of that tank in Tiananmen Square, had made and exposed Putin and exposed the other as destroyers of humanity and forced them to come on to unarmed people. So what Gandhi did is what others have done. It is something we too often walk away from, but we've got to be willing to do it. Because if we really want change to come, we have to be the change before we see the change. We have to be the change before we see the change. And so we always open with a form of theomusicology. We're going to open with that video now. And I'm going to move a few people around, get them up a little bit, get them intermixed a little bit. When Danita Jones and them will be next, Danita Jones and Jim Crosby from Texas, and they're right in the middle of primaries. So I know they don't have long with us, but we want them to simply say why it is Texas is mobilizing. Then we're going to hear from people from Louisiana and Arkansas and Kansas and other states But our host state tonight is Texas, and Sister Danita Jones and Jim Crosby will talk to us for a few minutes right after we hear this. We are the change.
Love is here, hope is here, truth is here, we are the change. Yeah! Now when I say we want, you say justice, we want justice, we want justice. When I say we want, you say justice, we want justice, we want justice. When I say we want, you say voting rights, we want voting rights, we want voting rights. When I say we want, you say voting rights, we want voting rights, we want voting rights. When I say we want, you say 15, want 15, we want 15. When I say we want, you say 15, we want 15, we want 15. When I say we want, you say justice, we want justice, we want justice. When I say we want, you say justice, we want justice, we want justice. Love is here, hope is here, truth is here, we are the change. Love is here, hope is here, truth is here, we are the change. Now watch this. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. You say, ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. One more time. Love is here, hope is here, truth is here. We are the Let's give it up, Texas!
Come on, talk to us tonight. Danita and Jim from Texas. Why is it that Texas is mobilizing for June 18th?
Thank you, Reverend Barbara. I'm Danita Jones, and I'm organizing Texans for June 18th and beyond because for too long, our elected officials have sold us dreams. But in reality, those dreams were nightmares. They must know that the people have united to defeat the electoral boogeymans, whether they're in Congress or our state houses. And we will mobilize for the mass poor people and low-wage workers assembly and moral march on Washington and to the Polls Mobilization Tour, starting with this virtual tour with my comrades from Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Now is the time for everyone, because everyone has a dog in this fight. It is time for you to organize for a movement that grows.
Danita, you know what? You always really just get straight to the point. I love that. Somebody make that into that. They've sold us dreams, but really what they have given us are nightmares, and we're not buying the nightmares anymore. We got a dream of our own. It's a third Reconstruction, and what can happen in this country if we transform it. They tell me that Brother Jim Crosby is not on, but that's why we always have more than just one person. So I'm gonna jump right to Julio Acosta from the Texas Poor People's Campaign. Julio, talk to us a little bit about why you are mobilizing for June 18th and calling on people all over this country to do likewise. Come off mute.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. As
Hello to
sending my
everybody.
greetings from
I am
Dallas,
saying
Texas.
hi
According to the Texas
Dallas,
Tribune
Texas.
paper, people of color
According to
represented
our newspaper,
95% of the growth
Our
of Texas
peoples
in
of color
2010
represent the
and in 2020.
45% of the growth
Given
Hold
the
on one second,
distribution
Julio.
of
Can you hold on
districts,
one- We've got two different interpreters on. We need one. Thank you so much. Go ahead now, Brother Julio.
with the redistribution of the districts, the majority in the assembly of the state. Texas is one of the places in our a republic where it's very, very difficult to vote. And then as a Latino immigrant, I'm going to show my T-shirt. This affects directly my community. We are not expanding our democracy. We are making to vote more difficult, and that is causing damage to our people because we have to impulse them. We have to push them to do the correct thing. Names: Abbott, our governor, John Cornyn, Dan Patrick, those are senators, and the people of Texas and the whole United States should get together with a voice, one voice, powerful voice that says that our pain is not going to be ignored anymore. We need to be heard. We need to be listened to. And we are inviting everybody. We are inviting every single person of color, every single person that is poor. We need your help. And we know that the movements that are impulsed and pushed by people cannot win if they are not impulsed by voice. Please go, show to the polls at the polls tomorrow. Vote with the primary candidates tomorrow. That is a start. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you so much. And you're right. They want us to think our votes don't matter. That's why they already said, well, primaries have already been decided. The midterms have already, because they don't want that powerful, and in your state, over 40% of the voters who are poor and low wealth that can make a tremendous change. And we understand though, and that's why, Julio, you said vote there in Texas, move in Texas, but then join us, because what's that third Reconstruction agenda we're demanding? End to the filibuster, fully protected voting rights, a living wage, guaranteed housing, guaranteed wages, guaranteed health care. We're not begging. These are the things that are going to save this democracy from its own demise, because we cannot be a country of 50% of the people, almost 43, only 7% more, that are living in poverty and low wealth, and the wealthiest country in the world. That's why we have to do it. So to jump now and talk to us some, Reverend Dr. Liz, who's also going to take over later in the program, but come on and talk to us about some of the grounds, some of the reason, the rationale, why. And while you're listening to her, RSVP, go to our page and RSVP, and then reach out and share this link with at least 10 or 20 other people and get them to RSVP saying they're going to show up on June 18th. Reverend Dr. Liz.
That's right, Bishop Barber. We are signing people up because we're gathered this evening to rise, mobilize, organize, register, educate, empower, and engage people to turn out and to turn up for June 18th, for that mass poor people and low-wage workers assembly and moral march on Washington into the polls. Because what we know and what we've already heard is if there ever was a time to fight, if there ever was a time to show up, if there ever was a time to vote, and if there was ever a time to mobilize and organize, it is now. We are 2 years into this pandemic. There's been no expansion of healthcare. There's been no extended child tax credit. There's been no living wage raise, no protection or expansion of our voting rights, continued attacks on our kids, on our schools, on people's utilities, on women, on trans folk, on the homeless, on indigenous communities, on sacred lands, and the list goes on and on. We are living through what the Bible calls a kairos moment, a time of great crisis, the crumbling of institutions, the breaking down of society, plagues and pandemics shedding light on the foundations of injustice. But this moment, and we here in the movement know this, it's about possibility for change. It's about birth. It's about the growth of movements for justice. It's a time for poor and low-wealth people to make bold and visionary demands like our third Reconstruction agenda, and people to come forward to repair the breaches, restore the streets to dwell in. This, everybody, is an all call. Join us. If you're homeless, if you're hungry, if you're yearning to be free, come together, sign up to what we call ambulance drivers. Be willing to drive right through the red lights of racism and poverty and low wages and the lack of health care. Show up in DC and at the polls and arrest the attention of the nation. Because today and every day, it's time to move forward together. and not one step back.
You're exactly right, Liz. This is the time to do it. How can, in the midst of even before COVID, 250,000 of people dying a year from poverty, 700 a day, go into COVID, and then we watch the government, watch players in the government, Republicans, Sinema, Manchin. We watch them walk back on 31 million families with child tax credit. Just let children drop back into even more poverty, and over 31 million people who would have benefited from raising the living wages. And now just today, the Huffington Post says the president has decided he won't even talk about BBB, Build Back Better, in the State of the Union. Somebody's going to say the state of our union is strong, but whose union? There are 2 or 3 different Americas. And in the America where there's poverty and hurt, the union is not well, but there is strength there. And it's the strength of the most moral voices in this country, poor and low-wealth people who can shift the moral narrative. And on June 18th, we want you to join us for the largest gathering of poor and low-wealth people, religious leaders, and their advocates in the history of the country, not for a day, but for an announcement, a declaration, and beyond Washington and move on. We are serious about not giving up on this third Reconstruction agenda. If Rosa Parks could sit down for 381 days, stay off the buses, we've only begun to stand. I understand that Jim is back on. And so, Jim, why don't you talk to us from Texas about why you are a member of the Polls and why you're calling on people to mobilize like never before, not only to the polls tonight in Texas, but also, tomorrow in Texas, but also why you're mobilizing for June 18th. And you understand that it can't happen unless Texas and Arkansas and Louisiana and other states in the South are right in the midst.
Loud and clear. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But the U.S. and the NATO countries have been acting in imperial ways too. So just thinking a lot about how the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are anti-empire from their start. Right. The Jews, the Hebrew slaves left the Egyptian empire when they were getting ready, or when they were in the promised land under the judges. Samuel said, "You're wanting a king. He's going to tax you. He's going to send your sons to war, and he'll replace God, in our national life." And that's what happened. And then a few centuries later, the result of that was they were taken into another empire in Babylon. And so they saw that as a new start when they got free from the exile in Babylon. In Jesus' time, the empire was Rome. They crucified him rather than let him call their control of Israel into question. In Ronald Reagan's time, he called the Soviet Union the evil empire, but he didn't acknowledge that we were an empire or our evil. And I think our word has become superpower. Instead of calling ourselves an empire, we use the word superpower, but it means the same thing, I think, that empire meant in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I think in getting comfortable with superpower status, we've become comfortable with and in denial of our imperial evil. And I think Dr. King saw that so clearly when he talked about the evil triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism. And he was crucified for that. He was lynched. He was shot for that. And so I think, he made it explicit, and that's what we're trying to do here today and in Washington on June 18th. If you want peace, work for justice. If you want justice, work for peace. So see you in Washington, June 18th.
That's right. And you put it right where it needs to be, my brother. We are standing up because empire also will take war money and use more war money to do war than it will to make sure people have health care. There's a whole analogy. Our Putin stuff is wrong and evil and desperate. There's some things that even we did as an article about some stuff in 1997, just from the United States. I mean, we have to have a change in our moral narrative. And thank you, Jim, for just putting it where it is. If you claim to be a person of faith and are not against the empire, then you've been bamboozled, hoodwinked. You've gotten caught up in the wrong stuff. We are the ones that are supposed to say that not only our faith, for all of you all are out there, especially if we got any critics, for Jim, just remember, he just quoted the Constitution. The Constitution said we'll establish justice. Then it also says that's the only way you can ensure domestic tranquility. Translation, no justice, no peace. No peace, no justice. That's right in the heart of the Constitution and the heart of the Bible, and just came out of Jim Crosby's mouth. Brother, we love you, man. Thank God for you and for you coming and rallying people. Look, y'all need to share this tonight and get people to start RSVPing. You need to share the link. It's up, Rob. I know it's somewhere. I don't see it on my screen because I don't see everything. But make sure that people are getting it where they can go to RSVP. We want thousands of people to RSVP tonight. RSV and push this out. Everybody on your email, everybody on your Twitter, everybody on your TikTok. If you got a can with a string in it, and that's what you use for a phone, get on the can with the string in it. If you got a drum on the top of the mountain, play a drum. Whatever you have, a pulpit, preaching, a street corner, stand on it. But you need to tell people not only to vote tomorrow in Texas and wherever else there may be a primary, but on June 18, 2022, Mass Poor People's Low Wage Workers Assembly, Moral March on Washington to the poll, the largest gathering of poor and low wealth people, religious leaders, and their advocate in the history of the country, not for a day, but for a declaration, a movement, and to present before the nation a third reconstruction and to build power and to declare and to lay out a moral reset by changing the narrators of our moral framework now, by putting the people who are hurt and are hurting in front of the nation so that the nation might see herself. You know, every now and then, y'all gonna date me now, not back in the 70s, we used to say, drop it. That's what we said to the DJ, drop it. So right now, DJ, videographer, drop it. It's time for the rejected to lead a justice revival.
Versus right. Saving this democracy's possibility is non-negotiable. This is about right versus wrong, and the right time to do right is right now.
140 million people in this nation are poor or one emergency away from economic ruin. But it does not have to be this way.
And you look at the diversity in this crowd. This is the America they are afraid of.
In the 1960s, Democrats and Republicans stood up together for social justice. It was the right thing then, and it's the right thing now.
We know that if Lyndon Baines Johnson was here, he would be saying, free to vote! Free to vote!
The goal of the Poor People's Campaign was to help the poor confront the evils that create poverty.
But my father used to tell me, don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
The government should listen to our voices, no matter our race, citizenship, or how much money we have.
We are not lazy. We are exhausted from the endless cycle of poverty.
We are demanding what is morally fair and just.
You need to stop suppressing and regressing and start addressing and resurrecting.
So stop messing with our right to vote.
We need to make it easier to access the ballot. We need to make it easier to live with dignity and respect without struggling. We didn't take shortcuts when we marched, and we don't deserve to be shorted in this legislation.
That's right.
My body is tired. My voice is shaky, but my mind is determined.
I have done nothing but fight.
We know that for democracy to work for us, it has to work for all of us. It has to include all of us. So show me
what democracy looks like.
The persistence, the strength, and the courage of this movement is what it's about.
For the sake of bringing change to all our communities.
I want the people to win. Take this opportunity in my hand.
Change does not come from the top down. It comes from the bottom up.
And we recognize as people of faith, this is the work of the church, but it is not only the work of the church.
We got a word for the U.S. Senate. Come back to Jesus. When we show up and show out, we walk our talk.
Together, we are strong. We can protect each other.
Insurrections never win. Only resurrections win.
And history tells us what we have to do when states work to subvert democracy. We're not going to let them stop us from coming out, and this is our country, and I'm what an American looks like.
The biggest gun we got is called a ballot box.
We must rise up as a moral army.
They're creating an America where everyone counts.
We must challenge every weak Democrat, every sorry Republican, every silent independent, that you will not stand in the way of our right to vote.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn you around.
It's time for the rejected to lead a revival of justice in America.
That's right. Learn more at poorpeoplescampaign.org, or you can go to the kairoscenter.org or repairsofthebreach.org. But most of all, right across the top, you can RSVP and say you're going to be. Imagine that multiplied 100 times in the nation's capital, not for a moment, but for a movement. Imagine that, the narrators, the people putting a face on these issues. Imagine them saying we won't turn back. Imagine them mobilizing from June to the polls and beyond. It is time for the sleeping giant of poor and low wealth people all across this nation to stand up and to say we will not accept any more lies, like lies about scarcity, lies we don't know what to do, lies we don't have a plan. No, it's truth-telling time. Didn't that feel like truth-telling, what you just heard? And you go right now, send this, share this, share this. You need 10 more people. Share it to 10 more people and let them know what's going on. Now, I'm jumping over the program some because I'm bringing people in. Is Nicole on? Nicole Coleman with the Texas Poor People's Campaign. Is she up here tonight? Nicole, we would love to hear right now why you are mobilizing. Why you are mobilizing.
I don't believe she's on.
Oh my, okay. Well, we want to thank God for Nicole. And by the way, is the young brother that walked him and the sister that was speaking, talking about his boss's check. I know he may not be on tonight, but that's a powerful brother. I know he's still engaged. We want young folk and young people to be involved in a powerful way. Now, let me tell you, there's a sister getting ready to come on right now. Now, she's about 16 years old plus, I think plus, I don't know how much the plus is. All I know, she's bad. She's bad from Louisiana. She doesn't take no for an answer. And she's helping us mobilize from Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Her name is Sister Sharon Levine from Rise Up St. James, Louisiana, and the Poor People's Campaign. If y'all don't know this sister, you need to hear her now. If she's coming to DC, the rest of us just might as well get in line and come on and follow behind her, because she knows what the truth is all about.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. The truth is, Rise St. James will stop Formosa classes from coming 2 miles from my home in St. James Parish in the 5th District. Our parish president would not listen to us a few weeks ago. We went to his office to speak to him, and he told us that he wants Formosa to come in. Our parish council in my district, we talked to him and asked him why did he vote yes for Formosa to come into the 5th District where he lived also. He said God told him to vote yes for Formosa. We said, God didn't tell you to poison his people. We don't know what kind of God he's serving, but God is not going to tell you to poison his people. We are already bombarded with 12 industries in the 5th District within a 10-mile radius. When you drive down Highway 18, you will smell chlorine. You will smell chemicals. I passed there this morning. They asked us to call EPA and to let them know. Whenever we call, they come out 2 or 3 days later and they don't smell the smell. They come at the wrong time. If you come at 12 o'clock at night, you will see a smog. You will smell the chemicals. These chemicals are poisoning us. They're killing us. If something is not done, we will not be able to live. This is an emergency. We've tried to talk to President Biden to ask him to stop this because we as a people, we want to live, and we will come to Washington, D.C. on June 18th, and we will march, and we will call on everyone to help us with this march, help us to save our lives, help us to breathe clean air and drink clean water. Thank you.
And look, you right. God didn't tell you. Boy, folk got a nerve. These politicians to lie on the Lord. God didn't tell you to poison his people. God didn't tell you to keep health care from his people. God didn't tell you not to provide a living wage. But that's why we've got to stand up, poor and low people and religious leaders, because we've got to shift this moral narrative. Because what he said is what too many believe, even in Congress all over, and they have to know that God's people, and there are people who may not be people of faith, but they understand they're standing up with us anyway. And because all of us know right from wrong, and that's just wrong, killing people. And we're looking for that great gathering coming out of Louisiana, every which way on trains and buses, on that stage, not somebody talking for you all, but you talking for yourself. And I want to do something real quick because we try to show how this hooks up. Now, you know, if we've got Julio organizing, and we've got Danita organizing, and then Jim Crow, look at the diversity, and then my sister from Louisiana, and then you flip and put a little Mark Pringle in there from Kansas. Oh my, that's the coalition that America isn't ready for, but they better get ready. They better get ready. So will you come on right now, Brother Pringle?
I sure will, Reverend, and I'm going to tell you and everybody else about the crisis in healthcare, which is affecting so many people here in rural Kansas. As a 4th-generation family farmer, I have learned how healthcare has become less accessible and more expensive in this state. There are many statistics which underscore this crisis. 9 rural hospitals have closed since 2005. In some cases, they were replaced by satellite clinics that transfer patients to their affiliated hospitals, which can complicate patient care. Since 2014, the lack of Medicaid expansion has resulted in the death of 2 Kansans per day and the loss of over $4 billion in much needed funding. Medical debt and bankruptcies, especially amongst farmers, have nearly doubled just in the past 5 years. This has been accompanied by a sharp increase in farmer suicides, which is 3.5 times greater than the average here in Kansas. We know these statistics, but we need to know the stories too. Stories like the farmer who lost a family farm trying to pay for his wife's hospitalization and treatment for cancer. The widow who died at home from COVID rather than risk a large hospital bill. 2 farmers who completed suicide. One was heavily in debt from farming, while the other feared being a financial burden to his family after a severe accident. I'm here to say we don't have to continue to accept this way of life.
Right.
Not anyone, anywhere they are in this country, in this state, we can't continue to accept this. So please join the Poor People's Campaign, which is a national call for moral revival. Also, please join us in Washington, D.C. on June 18th as we assemble and march for a more just and compassionate nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You always, brother, put it so powerful. This is about life and death. If you're on the side of life and nonviolence, you're with us. If you're on the side of social violence and social murder, then you're on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of the Constitution, the wrong side of God. Look, y'all, we're standing up because it's time for a resurrection. We don't need any more insurrections. We need a people are dying. Did you hear him say, even before COVID, 2 Kansas a day. That's over 700 people a year in just one state dying, not because it was their time to die, because the government refused to just do something as simple as healthcare that they do for every congressperson and every senator. They all have it free. You pay for it. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. And we've got to put that in front of the nation and make people see it. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you to you and your wife, who's a nurse as well. Look, we've got Josiah Matthews. We got one more state I want to get in, and then we're going to come back to some other people. But Josiah is from Arkansas, powerful biblical name. Josiah, talk to us about why Arkansas is hooking up with Louisiana and Louisiana is hooking up with Texas, and why all of you all are mobilizing everywhere and telling people this is that all roads lead to the mass Poor People's Always Works Assembly Moral March on Washington and to the polls to shift this moral narrative, build power, and to put before this nation a third Reconstruction agenda to save the democracy.
Good evening, Reverend Barber, Reverend Liz. Good to be here. Hello, my name is Josiah Matthews. I'm a tri-chair for the Arkansas Poor People's Campaign. I live in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I'm a husband. I have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 daughters. I studied welding at Calhoun Community College in Decatur, Alabama. In 2017, I was working at a company called Trinity Rail. And for 6 months, I experienced extreme discrimination and racism on the job. There was no union to help me resolve the situation I was facing. So I turned to the EEOC for help. I filed a complaint as well and an appeal, and they never helped to resolve the issue. I was fired. I had to forego payments on my credit card to take care of my family. My wife had to pick up more work. I had credit card debt that I couldn't pay. My credit score dropped, and 3 years later, I'm still paying off that debt and trying to get my credit score back up and back on my feet. My case happens a lot to a lot of people. We live in states with right-to-work laws where workers aren't allowed to join unions and at will, which means they can fire you without cause. These laws need to go, or people will steady be getting discriminated against on the job. That's why I joined the Arkansas Poor People's Campaign, because I was a victim of systemic racism. And despite the fact I went to college, I don't have a record. I vote. I'm active in my community. I did everything right, and still the system failed me. We sometimes just think about people who are poor, but don't think about these systems that are set up to put people in poverty. In April of last year, Arkansas passed a law that prohibits public employer from recognizing a union and makes workers' strikes illegal. Without unions, workers face low pay, poor benefits, bad working conditions, no paid maternity leave or sick pay. This is slavery. There's no other word, no other term for it. This bill passed in Arkansas Senate 24-6. The governor signed it on April 8th of last year. Every frontline worker in Arkansas is impacted by this law. Teachers, nurses, doctors, and poetry and factory workers, all of whom at the highest risk of contracting COVID because of too many radical right legislators oppose employer mask and vaccine mandates.
That's right.
This shows you that Arkansas State Senate puts profits before people, profits before family, and profits before healthcare. This is one of the reasons why I'm going to DC and helping others in my area to be able to go to DC and tell their story.
My brother Josiah, and that's why you're going to be on that stage telling your story in live and living color. Somebody get that on out saying they're putting profits before healthcare, profits before living, profits before union right. That's what we need to be saying, and that systemic racism and economic injustice are tied. You experience both of them, brother. And you're right. People need to understand another phrase, systems that drive you into poverty. You do everything right, and then the system drives you in. It's not about anybody wanting something for nothing. We just don't want people taking everything from us. We deserve a union. And yes, not having the right to a union is a form of modern day slavery. Not having workers' right because you're making somebody else profits and not being able to share in those profits. What else would you call it? Thank you so much, Brother Josiah. And right now I want to drop a video in because we invited the former President Trump and all the Democratic candidates that were running in 2020. We invited them. Now, Trump didn't come, which by coming, he'd already gave his answer, and none of the Republicans came, but Democrats came. I want y'all to listen to what they said. Now, because we're just simply holding them to what they promised to do. And it hadn't happened yet, and we won't be silent anymore. Take a listen to this.
Poverty spans every race, creed, color, and sexual orientation. There are 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country, 39 million children, 21 million over 65, 65 million men, 74 million women, 38 million Latino, 8 million Asian, 2.1 million Native, 66 million white people, 26 million African American. There are 40 million more white people living in poverty than there are African Americans. And all of those numbers combined makes up 43.5% of this nation. Almost half of this nation. And any nation that ignores half of its people is in a moral and economic crisis that is constitutionally inconsistent, economically insane, and morally indefensible. And that's why we want these candidates that we invited from both sides of the aisle, including the White House, to come here and speak to these issues.
And 9 candidates answered that call. Let's have Reverend Theo Harris ask a question.
Great. So the Poor People's Campaign has done an audit, and we found that there's 140 million people who are poor or one couple $100 emergency from deep poverty. There's so many folks, 43.5% of the population. The media doesn't cover it. Most politicians don't talk about it.
We had 26 presidential debates on the main stage, televised. Not one of them focused an hour on addressing the problems of 43.5% of this nation, 140 million poor and low wealth people. Will your campaign push the powers that be that are setting up the debates to have a debate where the focus is on systemic policy racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and this false moral narrative of religious nationalism that has moved its way into the White House and is actually helping to set policy. Will you advocate for a complete debate on the issue of poverty in the United States of America?
Yes.
Not only would I already have.
Well, you know, I would be thrilled to have a debate on those topics, and I would advocate to the powers that be.
All the media there, yes, okay.
Yes.
Right. Joy has a question.
I think we should, and I'm happy to talk to the DNC or anybody else to say that we should do it.
So yes, I will be a voice for that.
Of course. You want a short answer to that question? Yes, of course.
I love that. Yes. Yes. That would be fantastic.
Well, my brothers and sisters, Trump didn't do it. Republicans didn't do it. Democrats did. The only time they acknowledged that debate was when we were in Iowa, and there were hundreds of people standing out in 10 below degrees. But that's because they just think we're joking to some degree. I love them, but it's time to make it so that it has to happen. And we don't have to use violence. We have to use meanness. We can use the truth. We can use love. We can use our bodies nonviolently. But what we have to say to them is we don't need Republicans stuck in trickle down, and we don't need Democrats stuck in neoliberalism and the issues of poor, low-wealth people. You can't ignore 43% of your nation. You just can't. And those that, if they ever do it, they'll realize we actually help make them be better leaders and stronger leaders, and more importantly, be a part of the extending the life and the history and the growth of this nation and save it from its own failure to address systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, the false moral narrative, religious nationalism. For all those reasons and more, you need to be RSVPing right now. You need to be sending it to people. Join us June 18th, 2022 for the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Workers Assembly, Moral March on Washington, and to the polls. When we show our power, you get the respect of power. Amen. When you show your power, they begin to understand really who is the power, changing the moral narrative, building power, putting forth a third reconstruction. Sashay Shaw from Oklahoma, we want to get you in because Oklahoma is mobilizing, Texas mobilizing, Arkansas mobilizing, Louisiana. Talk to us about how you feel when you hear that, and why is Oklahoma? I mean, you all almost tracked us down and said, you better not do this without Oklahoma. Oklahoma ran us down and said, look, there can't be a poor people's campaign without Oklahoma. Why is that, dear Sasha? Sasha?
Good evening, Reverend Barber. I'm kind of geeking out because I, am a big fan. But, good evening, everyone. My name is Sasha Primo Shaw. I'm representing the Poor People's Campaign here in Oklahoma. I am an enrolled member of the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma and a freedman descendant of the Seminole and Chickasaw Nations. Wow. I'm honored to make remarks on behalf of my state today. Oklahoma is in a state of ongoing crisis. We currently incarcerate more people in the nation, but also more women in the world. There are many broken families as a result of this statistic. I'm the child of a formerly incarcerated woman who is Black and Indigenous as well. I'm also the niece of a currently incarcerated person in Missouri. Oklahomans who are in the Black community are in prison at a rate of 19.83 per 1,000 residents. That's more than 4 times the rate of white folks who are imprisoned in the state. Native American women make up 9% of the prison population, and African American women make up 20% of the incarceration rate here in the state. At the same time, we are still on the top of the list for active COVID infections. And many of us have dealt with this virus personally, either contracting it ourselves or losing loved ones. My own grandmother passed away from this virus late last year, and it was a very devastating loss for me. Because she raised me, and it was like losing my own mother. So, roughly 1 in 400 Oklahomans have passed from this. And at the same time, our state government is still treating this crisis casually, while actively creating conditions that create more pain. Earlier this year, the Board of Oklahoma County Commissioners voted to request $110 million from our COVID relief dollars from our state legislature, right? To help fund a new jail that would cost $300 million. Our current administration is currently fighting tribal sovereignty by pushing back on the McGirt decision. McGirt is the law of the land, and it gives power back to our tribes within criminal jurisdiction. And as Native Oklahomans, we're currently fighting for our tribal sovereignty every day. We're fighting against an administration that is not keeping Oklahomans safe by pushing strict COVID restrictions. And we are also bringing light to the high incarceration rate, which, obviously a lot of folks don't know about. And then that's why in June, I do want to encourage folks to come to DC so we can bring light to these issues in our little state, because we do have a lot going on here. So I'm just really thankful that I'm able to be in your presence as well as, others to talk about what's going on in Oklahoma and as a Black and Indigenous person. So thank you.
They never thought Black and Indigenous were going to be with Kansas farmers and Black women from Louisiana and folk from Texas. But guess what?
Yep.
And we understand systemic racism is, we look at it through the lens of voter suppression, mass incarceration, continued mistreatment of our Indigenous brothers and sisters and First Nation brothers and sisters, and the constant attacks on immigration justice. And the collateral damage that systemic racism does even to our white brothers and sisters. Look, we're serious. And this is the coalition. This is the fusion, not coalition. This is the fusion, moral fusion movement that has to understand, because the same forces that are hurting First Nation brothers and sisters in Oklahoma is blocking health care for Mark and his folk in Kansas. And they worked on keeping us apart, but that day is over. Yeah. And so I'm going to turn this over now to Reverend Dr. Liz Steele Harris. Our next person will be Dr. John Ella Holmes, and then the Reverend Frederick Haynes. I know this is out of order. And then Karina Whitaker Lewis. Then we want to ask in the fourth station if Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill would do a call to DC right in the middle. And in the Black church, is a rabbi on in the African American church, not the Black church because it's one church, but in our tradition, we used to have a thing where somebody would welcome you and then there was a response. And so we're going to ask Rabbi Alan Freeman of Temple Beth Shalom if after Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill gives his call, if a rabbi would respond from the Jewish community and say why the Jewish brothers and sisters and all are telling everybody, June 18, 2022, Mass Poor People's Assembly, Poor People's Low Wage Workers Assembly, and Moral March on Washington. So I hope you grab those in that order, Liz. I see you looking at me. So it's Dr. Ella Holmes, and then Reverend Dr. Frederick D. Haynes, and then Karina Whitaker Lewis, and then Reverend Dr. O'Neill Jackson, Alvin O'Neill, who is our leader, who is our keeping us on task. He's the executive director of all of this. And then Rabbi Alan Freeman is going to respond to him. And then Reverend Liz, you can take us out. Look, you got time to still share it with some more people and understand what Zora Neale Hurston said. I love it. She said, look, if folk cause you pain, I'm paraphrasing, and you just smile while they're causing you pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. It's time for us to say we don't enjoy this, and not only do we don't enjoy it, we don't enjoy it. We're not going along with it, and lastly, we know it doesn't have to exist. There is another way and a better way. Love you all. God bless you. Dr. Liz, you got it from here. Forward together, not one step
back. Indeed, and it is my great honor, with great excitement that we bring another sister up from Kansas, speaking about the issues and why we are going to June. And so, Dr. Janella Holmes, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. I am the voice of fewer than 2% of BIPOC farmers left in Kansas. I also represent 3 out of 10 Black farmers in Kansas that qualify for monthly commodity food boxes. I additionally represent the rural community of historic Nicodemus, the oldest all African American settlement from the Reconstruction period. I'm a 5th-generation farmer here in Nicodemus, where 98% of its residents either receive food stamps or monthly commodity food boxes. I am here to stress that our farmers and rural community members have historically and systematically suffered food injustices and inequities, and are often left to seek federal assistance via food stamps. Our white farmers and Black farmers both are at a poverty level, and both struggle to survive against the big industrial farms. 4th-generation historic Nicodemus descendant and legacy farmer, my cousin Bernard Bates, 85, passed away January 22nd. Mr. Bates was the first farmer in the U.S. to notify President Reagan and Reverend Jesse Jackson about the horrific discriminatory practices by the USDA in their loans, grants, and programs. The USDA foreclosed on Bernard in 1989. He lost his farm, was forced onto food stamps to feed his family, and never regained his ancestral land. Bernard's foundational work led to the Pigford versus Glickman lawsuit. However, he never received any compensation. Mr. Bates, my beloved cousin, died never again regaining that ancestral farmland, his pride, or the opportunity to pass on wealth and a farm. I am mobilizing in honor of my brother, a veteran who just passed away from COVID. This is not a new phenomenon. My ancestors and I have lived with these injustices for generations.
Yes, God.
The Kansas Black Farmers Association, Historic Nicodemus, Kansas, and Kansas, along with Reverend Pringle, will be represented at the Poor People's March, June 18th. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. And isn't it fitting that it's coming from Nicodemus, right? The structure of your whole life must be born again. And I hear the words of Dr. King saying, the structure of this whole society must be undone and redone and born again. And if that ever was so clear, it's through that experience, Dr. Holmes, that you embody, that you speak to, and that the world and the country must hear on June 18th and as we mobilize there. I now have the great honor of introducing the Reverend Dr. Frederick D. Haynes III, the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church and the co-chair of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes, it's amazing to have you here. We've always been welcomed in Texas with you, and here we are live from Texas. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Liz and Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson, Bishop Barber. All of you are heroes of mine. I thank you so much for your leadership and for exposing me to heroes from Kansas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and here in the state of Texas. Bishop Barber, thank you for being my prayer partner in my recent bout with COVID. He is not just a powerful prophet, he's a prayer warrior. Thank you so much. Michael Eric Dyson shared that when Dr. King took the movement north to Chicago to put the spotlight on economic injustice and poverty, as we are doing in the Poor People's Campaign, Dr. King rented an apartment in a slum on the west side of Chicago. During a march to protest abhorrent and racist housing conditions, a vicious racist spat on the drum major for peace and justice. Imagine that. Dr. King is leading a peaceful march and a racist spat on him. And a brother who was in the march prepared to physically retaliate. Dr. King, after wiping the spit from his face, said to the brother, "You're upset about the spit, but you live in conditions created by white systemic injustice that spits on you every day. We are here to make the system stop spitting on us." Yeah. We welcome the movement for the marginalized, this moral movement for the marginalized, to this area here in the South, where we find that systemic spit is always widening the gap between the have-gots and the have-nots. The Urban Institute, in a study, ranked Dallas, where I am, dead last in economic inclusion. Dallas is the most economically segregated city in the country. I think that's called spit. Southern Methodist University just came out with a report that highlighted infrastructure deserts, they call them. I call them infrastructure apartheid, because Dallas has more than 60 such infrastructure expressions of injustice, and the majority are on a particular side of town with Black, brown, and poor people. I call that spit. I think Dr. King would say, I'm talking about a city with an ugly history of redlining, real estate covenants, and bombing as means of social control. I think that's spit. Here in Dallas, 87% of the students in the Dallas Independent School District are food insecure. Sounds like spit to me. Zip code injustice has resulted in drastic life expectancy differences of cities and of citizens and communities within a few miles of each other. In one zip code here in Dallas, it's only 10 minutes from a zip code where the life expectancy is 85, but in this particular zip code, the life expectancy is 60. Too many identify with the theme from the song in the hit show Power. It's a big, rich town. I just come from the poorest part. And 50 Cent goes on to say, I grew up in hell, a block away from heaven. Texas is a big, rich state, but too many of us live in the poorest part because of spit. Systemic spit has hit the poor in Dallas in the form of banking apartheid. One side of town has banks with first-class services that partner with the community. On the other side of town, there's a proliferation of payday, car title loan, check cashing stores, and pawn shops. That is systemic spit. We're sick of the systemic spit. We're going to Washington to wipe off the systemic spit and demand investment in human infrastructure and the dismantling of systems that spit on humanity through poverty. We're going to Washington in the spirit of the mother of Bill Russell. Bill Russell, NBA Hall of Famer, says when he and his family moved into the projects, he got slapped by 5 guys. His mother made him go fight all 5 of them. And she said, it don't matter if you win or lose. What matters is you stand up for yourself. And so we're going to Washington to stand up for the poor, to stand up for justice, to stand up for ourselves, to stand against poverty, to stand against the war economy, to stand up because Bishop William Barber is still right. The pandemic exposed the fissures in our society that allow suffering to spread in the first place. So y'all, we going to DC to fix the fissures. We're going to DC saying in the spirit of the one who announced from the Hebrew Bible, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon us because God has anointed us to preach good news to the poor, to set the captives free, to heal those who are broken, to proclaim the year of economic justice. You ain't gonna spit on us no more.
Amen. Amen. And if you have not already been pushing this out and recruiting people and RSVPing, let that message be just the thing that pushes you over the edge and signs you up and 5 of your family members and 10 of your cousins and 100 of your friends. So please keep on pushing out RSVP at poorpeoplescampaign.org. Follow the link, push this out, make sure everyone hears these powerful testimonies, these powerful stories coming out of Arkansas, coming out of Kansas, coming out of Louisiana, coming out of Texas. And now it's my great honor to bring up Karina Whitaker Lewis, the Director of Religious Education at San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Georgetown, Texas, who we connected with on that march as well. Welcome this evening.
It is so good to be with you tonight, friends. I am so honored to hear your stories and find strength in our connection. And being in Texas, I need that strength. Over the last several days, I have had to provide comfort and solace to families in my congregation with transgender children. I have had to put more food in our little free pantry that helps feed our neighbors in need. I have had to sign petitions to try to keep this state from killing innocent people on death row. And I've prayed for peace with children who are scared of war. And this list goes on and on. And I know you know these stories, you share these stories, and you've had these experiences, and we are tired, and we are so, so angry. So it feels good to be connected to you now, and in that connection, be strengthened. I hope you feel that strength too. Let us use this strength to claim our power, because we do have power to overturn all these violent policies that are harming all of us, policies that keep people in poverty, treat us as expendable, destroy our planet, uphold racism, sexism, and hatred, and lastly, take away our vote and voice. Unitarian Universalists are in this fight because our faith calls us to be here. Believing in the inherent worth and dignity of every person and in the interconnectedness of all life, we live our values out loud when we join in this campaign. It is said that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Friends, I am so glad and grateful to be on this journey with you. Amen and blessed be.
Amen. Blessed be, indeed. Blessed be. And when you talk about that power, that compelling power of all of these different people from all across the country coming together. And what we also have learned in this campaign is about that sleeping giant that is waking up, and the power of the poor, of low income people to actually be able to rise up and enliven and enlarge this electorate. 1/3 of those voters in this country are poor and low income, and some of that power is a voting power. It's a organizing power. It's a pushing power. And now I want to have us hear our call to Washington, D.C., where we'll be flexing some of that power. And I want to introduce the Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson, the Executive Director of the Mass Poor People and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the Polls. Reverend Dr. Jackson, it is an honor to have you here with us, and we are here to hear your call.
Thank you, Dr. Liz. I think the call has already been given. It's been given by you, by Bishop Barber, by Dr. Haynes, by the previous speakers. It's already been given. This has been a great night. The diversity of this gathering, the divinity in our difference, the momentum is building all over the nation. I don't know about you, but I'm fired up and ready to go. For the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the polls, June 18th. Not a day, but a declaration, not a moment, but a movement we're building, not an insurrection, but a resurrection, a reconstruction, a revolution of values. I want to encourage all of you, maybe not at this moment, but to go soon to poorpeoplescampaign.org, sign up tonight, sign somebody up. fill a bus. We're working with a wonderful bus service, Rallyco, where you can just go online and pick a location and start filling a bus up. People are coming by bus, by train, by car, by plane. We've even got word that some folks are even planning to walk. So there are going to be all kinds of ways, but all roads are leading to Washington, D.C. Why? Because there were 140 million poor and low wealth people before the pandemic, and things have only gotten worse since the pandemic. Why are we coming? Because 57 years after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voting rights are under attack in nearly every state. And you know it's under attack in Texas and the surrounding states. Why are we coming? Because God did tell us to poison our people. Climate crisis is devastating our communities and our planet, and poor people are getting sicker every day. We're coming because we know scarcity is a lie. The only scarcity there is the moral consciousness and political will to do what is right. We are coming because we know what it's always taken to bring this nation together to higher ground, and that's people coming together in all of our rich diversity, coming together. And so we're coming by the thousands, by the tens, hundreds of thousands, coming together June 18. Join us, and we're going to keep coming until justice rolls down like waters and rightness like an ever-flowing stream, until this nation does right by all of its people. We're going to keep coming. Join us June 18, Washington, D.C.
Join us, join us, join us. Amen. So I now want to introduce a rabbi that we met also in Texas on that march, Rabbi Alan Friedman from Temple Beth Shalom. We want to thank him for sharing words with us this evening.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Alan Friedman from Austin, Texas, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to join with my fellow clergy in this mobilization effort for the mass poor peoples and low-wage workers assembly and moral march on Washington and to the polls. Particularly for those living in Texas, tomorrow is primary day, and this provides us with an opportunity to cast our ballots for those who share our values and who are committed to a vision of America with true liberty and full justice for all. What makes this country great is not its present, but the promise of its future. For America to reach that promise, we must not simply accept our country as it is, but instead we must remain faithful to a vision of America as it should be. For the values embodied in the Third Reconstruction Agenda are as old as the prophet Isaiah: to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke, is to share your bread with the hungry and to provide the poor with a home, and when you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst through like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. It is time for America's light to burst through and to heal the breaches among us, to unify in bringing about an America that is not only blessed by abundance, but in which every soul shares an abundance of blessing. May this be God's will for us all.
Amen. Indeed, this is God's will, and may we help make it so in the world. And by doing that, with folks in Cross Texas showing up for the primary tomorrow, as this election season rolls on across the country, and as we keep on mobilizing and organizing, registering and engaging and empowering and educating people for a movement to show up on June 18th for the mass moral march on Washington into the polls. We want to close with one more video from our work, calling us into this work. And as you watch it, remember you can keep on sharing this out, and you can share this live stream throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout all of our time until we get to June. But mostly make sure that you sign up and that you get everyone you know and some other people you haven't met yet to sign up to come to Washington, D.C., to be a part of the movement as we go marching in. As we say in this work, forward together, not one step back. Let us indeed move forward together, and let us watch this last video.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. New, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk, and we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change!
Reconstruyamos esta gran nación!
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
when we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed. We need the third reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
And I declare we have work to do. It is a moral abomination that there are 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country. It's time to give everything we have to deconstruct the interlocking injustices that are all around us. If you got gray hair, suit up one more time. If you're middle-aged and if you're young, pay your debt for living on somebody else's sacrifices. Because it's time.